Who are the 10 greatest NBA players who never won MVP? Throughout history, we've had a lot of great players. You've had guys like Michael Jordan, who won 5 MVPs to go along with his 6 championships. You've also had LeBron James, who's got 4 league MVP awards. But then you got all-time legends like Kobe and Shaq, who each only have 1 MVP, but it was enough to keep them off of this list. But I think you're going to be surprised when you see some of the names of some of the greats that never won an MVP. So on this journey, I'm going to break down my 10 greatest players in NBA history that never won the regular season MVP.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Welcome back to Journey of a Ballaholic, the best talk show for basketball addicts. I'm your host, General Hannibal X. Now, if you're new on this channel, you're going to be getting my passionate and unfiltered opinion on the hottest NBA and college basketball topics. Now, if you're a ballaholic like me, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now, but make sure that you hit that notification bell so that you'll be updated whenever I drop new videos, which is going to be every Monday and Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, before we get this video kicked off, let's go down to the comment section below for the comment of the day. Let me know, who do you think is the all-time best player that never won an MVP? So before we get the video started, let's go over the criteria that's used to rank this list. These are my top 10 players, but this list is not based on talent. This list is not based on who will win in a one-on-one situation. This list is only based on regular season MVP. So we're disqualifying finals MVPs, all-star MVPs. We're only looking at the regular season. Now, this ranking, we're gonna give a criteria based on a 3-point system. 1 point is going to be for any first team All-NBA appearances. 2 points will be given out for any top 10 MVP finishes. And 3 points will be given out for a top 3 MVP finish. So if you make a first team All-NBA, that's 1 point. If you make a top 10 finish, that's a 2 point, and top 3 finish is going to be a 3 point. We're gonna total all that up and we'll rank them based on their total score. I think you'll be surprised who actually is number 1, so make sure that you stick around to the end. All right, let's go ahead and kick this thing off with number 10. First up, I've got Isaiah Thomas from the Detroit Pistons. Now, Isaiah, as you see, he had 3 first team All-NBAs along with 4 top 10 MVP finishes. Add all that up together and he gives a point total of 11 score. Once again, we're adding 1 point for the first team All-NBAs, 2 points for any top 10 finishes, and 3 points for any player who finishes in the top 3 of an MVP voting. Go ahead and move on to number 9. I've got John Stockton from the Utah Jazz. John Stockton was one of the pioneers of the pick and roll and kind of really mastered that with Karl Malone. But unfortunately, because he played with Karl Malone, who won multiple MVPs, he really wasn't able to finish as high as some of those MVP votings. As you see, he got 2 first team All-NBAs, 5 top 10 finishes, which actually is pretty surprising for him. But he did not ever have any top 3 finishes, so he finishes with a total score of 12 points. Now, moving on to number 8, I've got the big man out of Georgetown, Patrick Ewing. Patrick Ewing was playing in one of the eras with some of the best big men of all time, with guys like Hakeem. You had guys like David Robinson, Shaquille O'Neal. I mean, he was in that true era of the great centers of all time. Unfortunately for Ewing, that kind of hurt his All-NBA appearances, where he only got 1 first-team All-NBA, but he did have 7 years in which he finished in the top 10 of MVP voting. Unfortunately, he was never able to crack that top 3, but it does give him a total score of 15, which puts Patrick Ewing as the number 8 greatest player to never win an MVP. Okay, let's move on to number 7. And at number 7, I got the Claw, Kawhi Leonard. Now, as we know, Kawhi Leonard has played for the Spurs, last year with the Raptors, and this year with Doc Rivers and the Clippers. And he's kind of had some up and down seasons. Load management, I think, has been one of the main things that's kind of derailed Kawhi Leonard from having an even more accomplished career. But as you see, he's had times where he's been extremely elite. 2 first-team All-NBA appearances. He's got 4 years of finishing in the top 10 in MVP voting. And he also has 2 years of finishing in the top 3 MVP voting. Unfortunately, Kawhi, like I said, he's never actually gotten that MVP, and I think a lot of that has to do with load management. You got to play more than 60, 65 games, and unfortunately for Kawhi, he's only had 2 years in his entire career where he's played 74 or more games. So he finishes with a total score of 16 points. Now, moving on to number 6, I've got Scottie Pippen. Now, Scottie Pippen to me is one of the most underrated players in NBA history. And a lot of times he gets a bad rap for playing alongside the GOAT, Michael Jordan. But the resume speaks for itself. Scottie Pippen still has 3 first-team All-NBA appearances. That's 3 now. And as on top of that, he has 5 years of being top 10 in MVP voting. You cannot sleep on the fact that Scottie Pippen, he didn't have a lot of elite years playing without MJ. There was only about a year and a half where MJ retired when they were on the Bulls together. So Scottie Pippen getting 5 years of finishing in the top 10, that says a lot. And then the 1 year that Jordan did not play, that full season, Scottie was top 3 in MVP voting. That just shows you how elite Scottie was. So Scottie Pippen finished with a total of 16 points, and I had to put him at number 6 as one of the all-time greatest players that never won an MVP. Now, coming in at number 5, I gotta go with Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd to me is one of the greatest point guards, one of the greatest floor generals the game has ever seen. He had 5 first-team All-NBA appearances, along with 5 top 10 MVP finishes, but he also surprisingly had 1 year where he finished in the top 3 in MVP voting. That gives him a total score of 18, which puts Jason Kidd as the number 5 player in NBA history to finish his career with no MVP. Okay, now we're down to the big 4. Now coming in at number 4, I had to go with Flash Dwyane Wade. Now everybody knows about that infamous 2008-2009 season where Dwyane Wade absolutely balled out. I mean, scoring over 30 points a game. He was elite on both ends of the court. And a lot of people felt that he should have won the MVP that year. Personally, I definitely think that LeBron and Kobe, they were number 1 in their conferences, leading their teams. So I do understand why he did not win it and why he wasn't in the top 2. But you got to give him credit. That was the 1 year he finished top 3 in the MVP voting. He also had 2 years of being a first-team All-NBA, as well as 7 years of being top 10 in MVP voting. So that's going to give Wade a total score of 19, which puts him at number 4. But coming in at number 3 is probably going to be the biggest surprise on this list. And to me, I think Chris Paul, who comes in at number 3, is one of the more underrated point guards in NBA history. Chris Paul, to me, is probably one of the most clutch players. And I think I may even actually have to do a video on that. But Chris Paul, to me, is one of the most clutch players that really doesn't get a lot of the credit. And he showed that he can be a leader of a team. Now, granted, we know the lack of playoff success. We understand the lack of championship, and clearly he doesn't have that MVP. But 2008 was his closest year of being able to get it, where he battled literally to the last game of the season, where Kobe Bryant wound up winning his only MVP, and Chris Paul came in as a runner-up. Now, that right there, it could have went either way. I think that Kobe Bryant deserved that. The Lakers wound up winning the number 1 seed that year, went on to go on to make the finals. So I totally understand why Chris Paul did not get it, but he had a legitimate case. I mean, you look at some of the advanced analytics, and Chris Paul had a legitimate case for winning MVP that year. We see he has 4 first-team All-NBAs, and he has 7 years of finishing in the top 10 in MVP voting, along with 2 years of finishing in the top 3, which gives Chris Paul a total score of 24 points. Now, the top 2 right here are some of the biggest names, some of the greatest players that never won an MVP. But we got to go back in time. We got to go back a little bit to some of the older eras for these 2, because these guys, their stats were insane. These guys, their awards and their NBA resumes are some of the best, and they never won an MVP. So coming in at number 2, I've got Elgin Baylor from the LA Lakers. Elgin Baylor was a 10-time first-team All-NBA player. Now you got to remember, Elgin Baylor was playing in the days of Wilt Chamberlain. He was playing in the days of Oscar Robertson, playing with Bill Russell. He was playing in a time where the elite talent was there, and it was a lot of teams that had a lot of talent on one team. Like I said, he played with other Hall of Famers. He had to go up against teams that had multiple Hall of Famers as well. And so Elgin Baylor, despite him having 10 first-team All-NBAs, despite him finishing with 8 years of top 10 MVP finishes, as well as 4 different seasons of being top 3 MVP finishers, that gives him a total score of 38. And you would think that when you consider his stats, I mean, Elgin Baylor's stats are just absolutely ridiculous. When you look at his stats and his resume, you would think that he would have won an MVP. Unfortunately, he not only never got an MVP, but Elgin Baylor also never won a championship. Now, that leaves us with the number 1 player. To me, the greatest player of all time that never won that MVP, that elusive regular season MVP. And it's none other than the logo, Jerry West. Jerry West, yes, he does have a Finals MVP, and he's the only player in NBA history to ever win a Finals MVP on a losing team. But what eluded him was the regular season MVP. Once again, in a similar situation as Elgin Baylor, he had to play alongside of Wilt. He had to play against Wilt. He had to play against Russell. He had to play against some of the all-time great players. And unfortunately, he was never able to get that regular season MVP. He does have 10 first-team All-NBA appearances. He has 9 years of finishing in the top 10 in MVP voting and 5 years of top 3 finishes. But here's what's very important, and here's what was so impressive about his resume. Out of those 5 years when he finished in the top 3, 4 of those years he was the runner-up to the MVP. 4 of those years. A couple of those years you had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar he was battling against during the 70s that was winning MVPs. He had, I think, Willis Reed. Like, he was going up against some of the greatest players of all time. Unfortunately, he comes in with a total score of 43, which puts him as number 1 on my top 10 greatest NBA players who never won an MVP list. So what do you think? What do you think about my top 10 list of the greatest players that never won an MVP? Did I leave somebody else? If I left somebody that you think that should have been in the top 10, let me know. Or if you disagree with who I think is number 1, if you have somebody ranked over Jerry West, let me know in the comment section below. Make sure you take a look at the videos that I have here for you. Until next time, peace.